Chapter 2. Early Years. For the next 8 or 10 months, Oliver was bottle-fed when anyone remembered to attend to him. Then he was sent to a smaller workhouse some 3 miles away, where 20 or 30 other young orphans rolled about the floor all day, without the inconvenience of too much food or too much clothing. They were in the charge of an elderly woman called Mrs. Mann, who received from the government 7.5 pence each week for each child. Being a woman of wisdom and experience, she knew what was good for the children and what was good for herself, so she kept the greater part of the weekly allowance for her own use and gave the children hardly enough to keep them alive. It cannot be expected that this system of bringing up children would produce any very strong or healthy specimens. On his 9th birthday, Oliver Twist was a pale, weak child, very thin and rather below average height, but the child was full of spirit. He was spending his 9th birthday in the coal cellar with 2 other children. They had, all 3, been beaten by Mrs. Mann and then locked up for daring to say they were hungry. Suddenly, Mrs. Mann was surprised by the appearance of Mr. Bumble, a workhouse official, a fat man, full of a sense of his own importance. The purpose of his visit was to take Oliver back to the large workhouse, for he was now too old to remain with Mrs. Mann. Oliver, whose face and hands had by this time been washed in a hurry, was led into the room by his kind-hearted protectress.
"Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver,"
said Mrs. Mann. Oliver obeyed. "Will you go along with me, Oliver?" said Mr. Bumble in his clear, ringing tones. Oliver was about to say that he would be happy to go along with anybody when, looking upward, he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who was standing behind Mr. Bumble's chair and making threatening gestures at him. He understood what she meant at once.
"Will she go with me?"
asked poor Oliver. "No, she can't," replied Mr. Bumble, "but she'll come and see you sometimes." Oliver pretended to be very sad at going away. It was easy for him to call tears into his eyes. Hunger and recent bad treatment are of great assistance if you want to cry, and Oliver cried very naturally indeed. Mrs. Mann gave him 1,000 kisses and, what Oliver wanted a great deal more, a piece of bread and butter, so that he should not seem too hungry when he got to the workhouse. Oliver was led away by Mr. Bumble from the home where not a single kind word or look had ever lighted the darkness of his early years. Life in the workhouse was very severe indeed. The members of the Board of Management had ruled that the children should work to earn their living, and that they should be given 3 meals of thin soup a day, with an onion twice a week and half a cake on Sundays. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall, with a huge pot at one end. Out of this the master, assisted by 1 or 2 women, served out the soup at mealtimes. Each boy had 1 small bowl, and nothing more, except on public holidays, when he had a small piece of bread as well. The bowls never needed washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again, and when they had performed this operation they would sit staring eagerly at the huge pot, as if they could have eaten that too. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered terrible hunger in silence for 3 months. In the end they became so desperate that one boy, who was tall for his age, told the others that unless he had another bowl of soup every day, he was afraid he might some night eat the boy who slept next to him. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they fully believed him. A council was held, votes were cast, and it fell to Oliver Twist to walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stood beside the huge pot with his 2 assistants behind him. The soup was served out. It quickly disappeared. The boys whispered to each other and made signs to Oliver. He rose from the table and, advancing to the master, bowl in hand, said, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He stared with horror and amazement at the small boy for some seconds. "What?" he said finally in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with his big spoon, seized him tightly in his arms, and shouted for Mr Bumble. Mr Bumble, hearing the cry and learning the cause of it, rushed into the room where members of the board were meeting and, addressing the gentleman at the head of the table, said, "Mr Limbkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more." There was general alarm. Horror showed on every face.
"For more?"
said Mr Limbkins.
"Be calm, Bumble, and answer me clearly. Do you mean to say that he asked for more after he had eaten the supper given by the board?"
"He did, sir," replied Bumble.
"That boy will be hanged," said one of the gentlemen on the board. "I know that boy will be hanged one day."
Oliver was locked up at once. Next morning, a notice was put up on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist away from the workhouse.